I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw how the trees leaned toward the lodge. Not dramatically, nothing you'd notice in a photograph, but there was a subtle inward tilt to the pines and birches that crowded the gravel driveway, like they were listening. Their branches formed a canopy overhead that turned the last quarter mile into a tunnel of green shadow, even in the middle of an October afternoon. My name is Mara Halpern, and 6 weeks ago I inherited my grandfather's hunting lodge in northern Michigan. At the time, it felt like a gift from the universe. I'd just been laid off from a marketing firm in Detroit that was restructuring for the third time in 2 years, and my relationship with my boyfriend of 4 years had collapsed in a series of increasingly bitter arguments about whose fault everything was. The apartment lease was in his name. I had nowhere to go and a savings account that wouldn't last through winter. Then the estate lawyer called about Blackwater Lodge. I'd been there exactly twice as a child. Brief, uncomfortable visits where my grandfather showed my cousins how to field dress a deer while my mother stood by the car, arms crossed, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. I remembered the mounted heads on the walls, the smell of old wood and gun oil, and the way the forest seemed to swallow all sound at night. My grandfather, Raymond Halpern, had been a hard man, quiet, weathered, with hands like oak roots and eyes that rarely settled on you for long. He'd made his money in lumber in the 70s, bought the lodge as a hunting retreat, and spent his last 3 decades essentially living there alone. When he died in July, peacefully in his sleep according to the medical examiner, he left the property to whichever grandchild needs it most. The lawyer's phrasing, not mine. I drove up on a gray Thursday, my Honda Civic packed with clothes, books, and a laptop. The nearest town, Millstone, was 20 miles south, a collection of practical buildings clustered around a single intersection, the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you've finished pumping gas. The lodge itself sat at the end of County Road 47, which turned from asphalt to gravel about 3 miles in and snaked through dense forest that looked like it hadn't changed since the glaciers retreated. Blackwater Lodge was bigger than I remembered. 2 stories of dark timber and field stone with a peaked roof and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. The windows were tall and narrow like the eyes of something crouching. Behind the structure, a clearing opened onto the woods proper, acres of pine and bare-limbed hardwoods that pressed against the property line like a crowd waiting for a door to open. Through gaps in the trunks, I could see the flat metallic glint of Blackwater Lake, cold and still. Inside, time had settled like dust. The great room dominated the first floor, high, vaulted, ceiling, a massive stone fireplace blackened by decades of use, and wide plank floors that creaked under my weight. The walls were decorated, if that's the word, with mounted animal heads. Deer with 8-point racks, a black bear frozen mid-snarl, a bobcat with yellow glass eyes, and something that might have been an elk, though the antlers seemed too wide, too sharp. Their glassy stares followed me as I moved through the space, a dozen dead things watching from their wooden plaques. I'd planned to take them down eventually, sell them on Craigslist or donate them to some taxidermy collector. But that first day I was too busy cataloging the basics. Running water, yes, but rust-stained. Electricity, yes, but the wiring looked pre-1980s. Heat, a propane furnace in the basement that groaned like an animal when it kicked on. And internet, absolutely not, which meant I'd need to budget for a satellite setup. The upstairs consisted of 4 small bedrooms and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. I chose the corner room with windows facing the driveway, reasoning that I'd hear anyone approaching. The mattress smelled like mothballs, but the sheets in the linen closet were clean enough after a wash. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, hungry, and determined to make the place feel less like a mausoleum. I opened windows despite the cold, letting in the smell of pine and damp earth. I swept the floors, wiped down surfaces, and started a fire in the great room to chase away the chill. That's when I found the rules. I'd been sorting through my grandfather's study, a cramped room off the kitchen lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets, looking for property tax documents or a deed. Inside an old leather ledger marked Hunting Logs 1987-1992, I found a single sheet of paper, typewritten on an old manual machine, the letters slightly uneven. It was folded in half, creased with age, and labeled at the top in all capitals. House rules for whoever stays after dark. Below that, 9 numbered rules. Rule 1, lock the back door before sunset. If someone knocks on it after dark, you did not hear it. Rule 2, this line was crossed out, the text underneath completely obscured by thick black ink. Rule 3, do not open the curtains facing the tree line between midnight and 3 a.m., no matter what you hear outside. Rule 4, also crossed out. Rule 5, if the fireplace lights itself, do not sit facing it. Keep your back to the flames until it goes out. Rule 6, crossed out. Rule 7, if the mounted heads turn to watch you, pretend not to notice. Do not count them. Rule 8, crossed out. My first reaction was to laugh. It had to be some kind of joke, my grandfather's way of hazing newcomers, or maybe a tradition from his hunting buddies to scare city relatives. The language was too specific, too absurd. Does the fireplace light itself? Mounted heads turn to watch you? But as I stood there in the dimming light of the study, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, I felt the weight of the lodge pressing down around me. The silence was too complete. The mounted heads in the great room seemed closer than they'd been that morning. I carried the sheet out to the main room and set it on the mantel, propped against a tarnished brass candlestick. I told myself I'd ask someone in town about it. Maybe there was a history here I didn't know, some old campfire tradition. The sun was setting, the sky beyond the windows turning a deep orange red that made the tree line look black and sharp. I remembered Rule 1 almost as an afterthought. Lock the back door before sunset. I walked through the kitchen to the back entrance, a heavy wooden door with a tarnished deadbolt and a small window at eye level. The door was slightly ajar, showing a narrow view of the back clearing and the forest beyond. Cold air seeped through the gap. I pushed it shut and turned the deadbolt, more out of habit than belief. The lock clicked into place with a solid final sound. "There," I said aloud, to no one. Rule followed. My voice sounded too small in the empty lodge. I made dinner from the groceries I'd brought, pasta, jarred sauce, a wilted salad, and ate at the long wooden table in the great room, the fire crackling in the hearth. The mounted heads watched from the walls, their glass eyes reflecting the flames. I tried not to look at them directly. By 10 o'clock, I was exhausted. I washed the dishes, banked the fire, and headed upstairs to the corner bedroom. Through the window, the driveway was a pale ribbon in the moonlight, the trees pressing close on either side. Beyond, the forest was a solid wall of black. I was asleep within minutes. The knock came at 11:34 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the moment I woke, heart already hammering, some primal part of my brain screaming that something was wrong. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, heavy, like a fist on solid wood. From the back door, I sat up in the darkness, blankets tangled around my legs, listening. The lodge was silent except for the soft groan of old wood settling and the distant whisper of wind through the pines. Then the knock came again, 3 times, patient, deliberate. No car had come up the driveway. I would have heard it. The gravel was loud, the acoustics up here too good. No headlights had swept across my windows. The nearest neighbor was at least 5 miles away, and I hadn't told anyone I was fully moved in yet. A voice called out, muffled by the door but clear enough to understand. "Hey, Mara, it's me. You gonna open up?" Male, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. The cadence was almost like my grandfather's, that same unhurried rural Michigan inflection, but softer, smoother, like honey poured over gravel. Too smooth. My grandfather had been dead for 4 months. I stood slowly, phone clutched in one hand, and moved to the bedroom doorway. From here, I could see down the stairs to the first floor. The great room was dark except for the faint glow of embers in the fireplace. The kitchen was beyond, and past that, the back door. The knock came a third time, harder now. The frame rattled slightly. "Mara," the voice again, patient but insistent. "I know you're in there, sweetheart. The door's locked. That's good, but you can let me in. It's cold out here." My hand was on the banister, one foot on the top step, before my gaze fell on the mantel below. The rule sheet just barely visible in the ember light. Rule 1. Lock the back door before sunset. If someone knocks on it after dark, you did not hear it. You did not hear it. Not "don't answer it," not "don't open it." You did not hear it. I stopped, stood frozen on the stairs, every muscle locked. My rational mind screamed that someone could be hurt, that I should at least check, that this was ridiculous. But another part, older, deeper, whispered that the voice was wrong, that the cadence was a copy, not an original, that nothing good was on the other side of that door. The knocking came again, and this time it went on for 10 seconds straight, not frantic but rhythmic, almost playful. Testing. I forced myself to turn around, to walk back to the bedroom, to close the door and sit on the bed with my back against the headboard. I opened my phone and stared at the screen, ready to call 911, but something stopped me. What would I say? Did someone knock on my door? That they sounded like my dead grandfather? I waited. The knocking continued sporadically for another 20 minutes, sometimes at the back door, sometimes at the kitchen window, once at the front door. Each time the voice called out, shifting slightly. Sometimes it sounded like my grandfather, sometimes like my father who lived in Florida. Once it sounded like my ex-boyfriend, which was somehow the worst, but I did not hear it. I repeated that to myself like a mantra, hands clamped over my ears, eyes squeezed shut. You did not hear it. Sometime after 1 a.m., the sounds stopped. The lodge fell silent again, and eventually I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. When I went downstairs at dawn, the back door was still locked. I checked it twice, then stepped outside into the cold morning air. A thin layer of frost covered the ground, glittering in the pale sunlight. There were no footprints on the back step, no tracks in the frost leading to or from the door. But the door frame right around the lock had fresh gouges in the wood, 4 parallel scratches, deep and deliberate, like something had dragged claws or a blade down the surface, testing the strength of the barrier. I stood there for a long time, staring at those marks, my breath misting in the cold air. The rules weren't a joke. I spent the next 3 days trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The scratches on the doorframe were from an animal, I told myself. A raccoon, maybe, or a bear testing the door for food. The voice had been the wind, my exhausted brain conjuring familiar sounds from white noise and creaking wood. The lack of footprints meant nothing. The frost had been patchy, inconsistent. I repeated these explanations while scrubbing floors, organizing my grandfather's cluttered study, and making lists of repairs the lodge needed. I kept busy. I kept the lights on. I did not, under any circumstances, look too long at the rule sheet still propped on the mantel. But I also made sure to lock the back door well before sunset each evening. The lodge revealed itself slowly during those first days. It was a place built for function over comfort. Thick walls to keep out the cold, small windows to conserve heat. a layout that prioritized the great room and its massive fireplace as the heart of the structure. My grandfather's belongings were everywhere: rifles in a locked cabinet, shelves of hunting magazines dating back to the 70s, boxes of ammunition and camping gear in the basement. The kitchen pantry still held canned goods with expiration dates from 3 years ago. In the study, I found more ledgers, decades of meticulous records documenting every deer taken, every duck shot, every fish caught. My grandfather's handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, noting dates, times, weather conditions, and locations with scientific detachment. But as I flipped through the older books, I noticed the entries changing. The handwriting grew shakier. Notes became less about hunting and more about observations. November 12, 1994, heard whistling from the north tree line, 2:47 a.m. No wind. Investigated at dawn. No tracks. March 3, 1998. Deerhead in Great Room, 8-point buck, 1989, was facing east this morning. I mount them facing west, always west. October 30th, 2001. Something knocked on the cellar door from the inside. Cellar was empty when I checked. Reinforced the lock. I told myself these were the rambling observations of an old man spending too much time alone, his mind playing tricks in the isolation. But I also noticed that the entries stopped abruptly in 2015, and after that the ledgers contained only blank pages. On the fourth day, my cousin Eli called. "Hey, stranger," he said, his voice bright and familiar through the phone's speaker. "Heard you're playing Pioneer Woman up in the woods. How's the rustic life treating you?" Eli was my age, maybe a year older, a construction contractor from Grand Rapids with a skeptical streak and a habit of showing up unannounced when he thought family needed help. We'd been close as kids, drifting apart as adults, but his voice was exactly what I needed. Normal, grounded, unimpressed by ghost stories. "It's quiet," I said, which was true, "and cold, and full of dead animals staring at me." He laughed. "Yeah, Uncle Ray was big on the trophies. Listen, I've got a few days off next week. Thought I'd drive up, help you patch whatever's falling apart. Old places like that always need work." I hesitated. Part of me wanted company desperately. Another living person to fill the silence, to make the lodge feel less like a mausoleum. But another part, the part that had sat in the dark listening to something pretend to be my grandfather, wondered if bringing Eli here was a good idea. "You sure?" I asked. "It's kind of in the middle of nowhere." "Mara, I've worked on hunting camps from Marquette to Muskegon. I'm sure I can handle your grandfather's place. Besides, you shouldn't be out there alone." The way he said it, like I was being silly, like the danger was isolation rather than something else, made my decision. "Okay," I said. "Yeah, that'd be great." He arrived on a gray Saturday morning, his truck rattling up the gravel driveway with toolboxes and lumber strapped in the bed. He was dressed for work: flannel shirt, canvas jacket, boots caked with dried mud. When he climbed out and looked up at the lodge, he let out a low whistle. "Man, this place is straight out of a horror movie," he said, grinning. "You know that, right?" "I'm aware," I said. He spent the afternoon fixing small things: a loose railing on the porch, a window that wouldn't latch properly, a section of gutter that had pulled away from the roof line. I made sandwiches and coffee, and we ate on the porch, watching the wind move through the trees. It felt almost normal. That evening, as the sun began to set and shadows stretched across the clearing, I showed him the rule sheet. He read it in silence, standing by the fireplace, then looked up at me with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You're not buying this, right?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some weird things have happened." "Like what?" I told him about the knocking, the voice, the scratches on the doorframe. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from curiosity to skepticism. "Mara," he said gently, "you just moved into a remote lodge by yourself after a shitty year. Your brain's going to play tricks on you. That's just how isolation works. And the scratches? This place is surrounded by wildlife. Hell, you probably have a family of raccoons living in the crawl space. It didn't sound like the wind, I said. It never does. He tapped the rule sheet. Your granddad was a storyteller. He probably wrote these after one too many whiskeys trying to spook his hunting buddies. My dad told me stories about the pranks they'd pull on each other. Fake tracks, recordings of weird sounds, all that shit. This is just more of the same. He turned to look at the mounted heads lining the walls, their glass eyes catching the lamplight. These are dead, he said, tapping the plaque under a large buck. Wood and bone. They're not watching you, they're not turning around, it's your mind making patterns out of nothing. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. We made dinner together, chili from a recipe I found in my grandfather's handwritten cookbook, and ate at the long table, trading stories and catching up. Eli had broken up with his girlfriend 6 months ago, was thinking about starting his own contracting business, and was worried about his father's health. Normal problems, human problems. The fire crackled in the hearth, and for a few hours the lodge felt like just a building. Then the wind picked up. It started around 10 p.m., a low moan that built to a howl, rattling the windows and making the whole structure groan. Outside, the trees thrashed and swayed, their branches scraping against the siding. The temperature dropped sharply, and I got up to adjust the thermostat. Storm rolling in, Eli said, glancing toward the windows. Supposed to be a big one. By 11, rain was hammering the roof in sheets, and the power flickered twice but held. We sat in the great room, Eli flipping through one of my grandfather's hunting magazines, me scrolling through my phone's saved articles. No signal, but I downloaded a bunch before leaving Detroit. I didn't notice when Eli put the magazine down and stood up. I didn't notice when he walked toward the windows. I looked up just as he reached for the heavy curtain facing the tree line, the one that covered the wide picture window looking out toward the forest and the lake beyond. Eli, don't, but he'd already pulled it aside. The curtain slid back with a soft hiss of fabric on rod, revealing the window and the darkness beyond. At first there was nothing, just black glass reflecting the warm lamplight of the great room, our own faces staring back like ghosts. The rain streaked down the pane in rivulets, distorting everything. Eli leaned closer, cupping his hands around his eyes to block the interior light. Thought I heard something out there, he muttered, like a whistle. I stood frozen, the rule sheet burning in my memory. Rule 3, do not open the curtains facing the tree line between midnight and 3 a.m., no matter what you hear outside. Eli, close it, I said, my voice tight. Please. It's not even midnight, he said, not turning around. And it's just a window, Mara. He was right. The old farmhouse clock above the mantel read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes to spare. But something about the way he'd said whistle made my skin crawl. I hadn't heard anything over the storm. What kind of whistle? I asked. Low, like someone calling a dog, maybe. He pressed closer to the glass. There, you see that? I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to grab him and pull him away, to close the curtain and turn all the lights off. But I also couldn't leave him there alone. I crossed the room and stood beside him, forcing myself to look out into the storm-lashed darkness. For a moment, I saw only rain and wind-tossed branches, the forest a churning mass of shadow. Then slowly, my eyes adjusted. There were shapes between the trees, not tree trunks. I knew the geography of the tree line by now, had memorized which pine stood where during my daytime explorations. These were different, taller, narrower, too evenly spaced, and they were standing perfectly still despite the wind. You see them? Eli whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. One of the shapes moved, not swaying with the trees, but deliberately gliding forward through the underbrush until it reached the edge of the clearing. The rain seemed to pass through it rather than around it, and where the faint light from the lodge windows reached it, I could see nothing. A void, a space where darkness was thicker, more present. But there were eyes, two faint red points, low and steady like distant taillights on a foggy road. Then a second shape joined the first, and a third. They stood at the border where the clearing met the forest, just beyond the reach of our lights, watching. "What the fuck?" Eli breathed. A whistle cut through the storm, higher pitched this time, almost musical. It came from the left side of the clearing. A beat later, an answering whistle came from the right, deeper, more resonant. The shapes didn't move, but I had the overwhelming sense that they were communicating, coordinating. And then I made the mistake of looking at the window itself, at our reflections in the dark glass. Behind Eli's translucent face, I could see the great room, the fireplace, the furniture, the mounted heads on the walls. Every single head was turned toward us. The 8-point buck, the black bear, the bobcat, the elk with its 2 wide antlers. All of them facing the window, their glass eyes fixed on our backs. I hadn't heard them move. There had been no sound of wood scraping on wood, no creak of old mounting hardware. But they had moved. "Eli," I said very quietly, "we need to close the curtain now." "Yeah," he said, his voice hollow. He'd seen them too. I could tell by the way his reflection had gone pale, the way his hand was trembling against the glass. He reached for the curtain, but before he could grab it, the light surged, flaring painfully bright for 2 seconds, then snapped back to normal. In those 2 seconds, the shapes outside rushed forward, not running, not walking, rushing, closing the distance between the tree line and the window in a movement too fast to track, too fluid to be natural. By the time the lights returned to normal, they were pressed against the glass, so close that I should have been able to see details. But there were no details. Just darkness. Just those red eyes now at eye level, burning with an intelligence that was ancient and utterly alien. And then very slowly one of them raised what might have been a hand, long, too many joints, and tapped on the glass. 3 times. Patient. Deliberate. The same rhythm as the knocking from my first night. Eli made a sound I'd never heard from him before, something between a gasp and a sob, and yanked the curtain closed. The fabric swung shut, blocking our view. We stood there in the sudden isolation of the great room, breathing hard, neither of us speaking. "Did you?" he started. "Yes." "And the heads?" "Yes." He turned slowly, as if afraid of what he'd see. I turned with him. The mounted heads were all facing forward again, exactly as they'd been positioned when we first sat down. The buck is looking slightly left. The bear is looking right. The bobcat stared at some point near the door. Normal. Still. Utterly lifeless. "I need a drink," Eli said. I found a bottle of bourbon in my grandfather's study, half empty, dusty, but unopened for who knows how long. We sat at the kitchen table as far from the windows as we could get and passed it back and forth without speaking. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the lodge was silent except for the soft groan of old wood and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Around midnight, we heard it. A sound like something heavy dragging itself around the perimeter of the lodge, not walking. Dragging, scraping against the foundation stones, pausing at each window, then moving on. It circled 3 times, then stopped. Eli looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were right. This place is... something's wrong here." "Yeah," I said. "What did your grandfather know?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." We didn't sleep that night. We sat in the kitchen with every interior light on, The rule sheet spread on the table between us and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, gray and weak through the dissipating storm clouds, we went outside together to look. The ground around the lodge was churned mud and scattered leaves from the wind. But there in the soft earth near the foundation were marks. Not footprints exactly. More like furrows, as if something with multiple limbs or appendages had pulled itself along, distributing its weight unevenly. The marks circled the entire lodge, passing under each window. At one point, near the kitchen window, there was a clear impression. Something like a hand, but with fingers too long and too thin, each one ending in a point. The impression was nearly 2 feet across. Eli photographed it with his phone, though we both knew the image would look like nothing, just mud and shadow tricks. He was shaking. "I need to go into town," he said. "Talk to some people, figure out what the fuck we're dealing with." "Reed," I said, remembering something from one of my grandfather's ledgers, a name that appeared frequently in the early years, then disappeared. "Reed Morrison. He used to hunt with my grandfather. You know where to find him? Hardware store, maybe? Small town. Someone will know." Eli nodded, already moving toward his truck. "I'll be back before dark. Keep the doors locked. Keep away from the windows. And Mara..." He looked back at me, his face serious in the pale morning light. "Don't go outside alone." After Eli left, the lodge felt even emptier than before. I stood in the great room, listening to the sound of his truck fade down the gravel driveway, and tried to decide what to do next. Every rational impulse told me to pack my things and leave, follow Eli into town, find a motel, put this place in the rearview mirror, and never look back. But something kept me rooted. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the fact that I had nowhere else to go, no money for rent, no job waiting. Or maybe it was something else. A need to understand what my grandfather had lived with all those years, alone in this place, following rules he'd written in exchange for survival. Everyone was written in exchange for someone I couldn't bring back. That line from his letter kept echoing in my head. I made coffee and forced myself to eat something, then returned to the study. If my grandfather had left answers, they'd be here, buried in decades of accumulated records. I started with the filing cabinets. The top drawer held property documents, tax records, receipts for repairs and equipment. Mundane paperwork that told the story of a man maintaining an aging building. But the bottom drawer was different. It was locked, the small keyhole tarnished with age. I searched the desk until I found a ring of old keys in the back of a drawer, tucked under a stack of yellowed envelopes. The third key fit. Inside were 3 items: a leather-bound journal, thick and worn with no title on the cover; a manila envelope containing old Polaroid photographs, maybe 30 or 40 of them, held together with a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it; a sealed letter addressed in shaky handwriting, "To whoever lives here next." I started with the journal. The first entry was dated September 15, 1973, just after my grandfather bought the property. The handwriting was confident, the tone optimistic. "Close the lodge today. Sally thinks I'm crazy, but I've been wanting a place like this since I was a kid. Good hunting land, private lake, far enough from civilization to have some peace." The realtor mentioned the previous owner moved out suddenly, left most of the furniture. Better for me. Means I can move in right away. The entries continued in that vein for months. Weather observations, hunting successes, notes about repairs and improvements. My grandmother appeared occasionally. Sally visiting for a weekend. Sally complaining about the mounted heads. Sally saying the place gave her the creeps. Then, in January 1974, the tone shifted. "Heard something strange last night. Woke around 2 a.m. to what sounded like someone walking on the porch. Heavy footsteps, deliberate. Got my rifle and checked. No one there, no tracks in the snow. Fresh powder had fallen around midnight and the porch was covered. Nothing. Sally says I imagined it. A week later, the walking again. This time I watched from the window. Saw nothing, but the sound was clear. Back and forth across the porch for 10 minutes, then stopped at the front door. Whatever it was stood there for a long time. I could feel it waiting. More entries followed, each documenting strange occurrences. Knocking at odd hours, whistling from the woods, the sensation of being watched. My grandfather's responses grew more methodical, more investigative. He started keeping detailed records of every incident, noting times, locations, and weather conditions. Then came March 1974. Brought Jim Carver and Tom Reed up for a weekend hunt. Didn't tell them about the noises. Figured they'd think I was cracking up. Saturday night, Jim went out on the back porch for a smoke around 11 p.m. Came back in white as a sheet. Said someone had called his name from the trees. Asked him, "You gonna come out here, Jim?" In a voice that sounded like his ex-wife. Jim hadn't told any of us he'd gotten divorced. We spent the rest of the night inside. In the morning, found a deer carcass in the clearing, a fresh kill, throat torn out, but no tracks around it. Not ours. The meat was wrong. Tom, who's been hunting for 40 years, said he'd never seen anything like it. Said the tissue looked restructured, like something had tried to put it back together wrong. Jim won't return my calls. I flipped through more pages, watching my grandfather's understanding evolve. He started researching the property's history, talking to old-timers in Millstone and digging through county records. He discovered that Blackwater Lodge had been built in 1921 as a private hunting club, abandoned in 1967 after several members disappeared during a winter hunt. The official report called it a snowstorm tragedy, but local rumors told different stories. Stories about things in the woods that wore human faces. Stories about whistling that sounded like music until you got close enough to hear the words. Stories about a standing rule among the old logging camps. Never under any circumstances answer when something calls your name after dark. My grandfather started compiling rules based on his own experiences and the stories he'd gathered. The earliest version of the list appeared in 1978. Rule 1. Lock all doors at sunset. Do not answer knocking after dark. Rule 2. Never let the fire go out completely between November and March. Rule 3. If you hear your name called from the forest, do not respond. The list evolved over the years as new situations arose. Some rules were crossed out and revised. Others were added in increasingly shaky handwriting. By the 1990s, the list had stabilized into the version I'd found, with certain rules heavily redacted, crossed out so thoroughly that the original text was impossible to read. I wondered what had happened to make him hide those particular rules. The journal entries grew more paranoid as the years progressed. November 1989. Sally refuses to visit anymore, says the heads watch her. Says she saw one of them blink. I tell her it's the lighting, the fireplace making shadows, but I know what she saw. They do watch. They learn. I think they're connected somehow, like windows or cameras. Something out there uses them to see inside. March 1992. Found Tom Reed's truck in town. He'd driven up to visit without calling ahead. I was out checking traps. When I got back, his truck was in my driveway, driver's door open, keys in the ignition. No Tom. No note. Found his rifle on the back porch, barrel pointing at the woods. His coffee mug was still on the porch rail, half full, still warm. I drove to his house that night. Tom answered the door. Said he'd never been to the lodge, had been home all day. Showed me his truck in his garage, same make, same model, same license plate. Said maybe I should take a break from that place. I know what I saw. I poured out his coffee. It was real. The entries ended abruptly in 2015. The last one was brief. I understand now what this place is, what it's always been. The rules aren't protection, they're negotiation. The more you give, the more it takes, until you can't tell the difference between following rules and being kept. To whoever reads this, the rules work, but they're a trap. Every time you follow them, you admit this place has power over you. And eventually you won't be able to leave, because leaving means breaking the rules. And breaking the rules means... The sentence ended there, unfinished. I set the journal aside and opened the envelope of photographs with trembling hands. They were old Polaroids. The colors faded to sepia and blue. Most showed ordinary scenes, my grandfather and his hunting buddies posing with deer, group shots on the porch, images of the lodge in different seasons. But in several photos, if you looked carefully at the background, at the tree line, at the dark spaces between the trunks, some shapes didn't belong. Tall, narrow silhouettes that could have been trees or shadows, except they appeared in multiple photos taken years apart, always in slightly different positions, always closer to the lodge. One photo made my stomach clench. It showed my grandmother standing on the front porch, smiling tightly at the camera. The date stamp read, July 1983. Behind her, barely visible in the dark window beside the door, was a face. Not human. The proportions were wrong. Too much space between the eyes, the mouth extending too far horizontally. And it was looking directly at the camera with an expression that might have been curiosity or hunger. I'd seen that window 100 times. There was no room behind it, just a shallow coat closet. I spread the photos across the desk and studied them, trying to find patterns. In several images, the mounted heads visible through windows or in the background seemed to be in different positions than they should have been, given the time period. The 8-point buck that my grandfather had shot in 1989 appeared in a photo dated 1985, already mounted, or something that looked like it did. My hands were shaking as I reached for the sealed letter, the final piece of my grandfather's archive. The envelope was addressed in the same shaky handwriting as the late journal entries. I tore it open carefully and unfolded 2 pages of lined paper. To whoever lives here next, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and you've inherited my burden. I'm sorry for that. I tried to keep the property out of the family's hands, but my lawyer told me the land couldn't be sold. Something about the original deed, restrictions I don't fully understand. So it goes to family, and now it's yours. By now you found the rules. You probably think I was senile or paranoid. You're wrong. Every rule was written in blood, sometimes literally. Every crossed out line represents something I learned too late, something that cost a friend, a visitor, or a piece of my own sanity. This land has a memory. I don't mean metaphorically. The ground, the trees, the water. They remember everyone who set foot here, every death, every fear. And something out there knows how to access that memory. It can wear faces like masks, speak in stolen voices, replay moments from the past like recordings. The mounted heads were a mistake, my mistake. I thought displaying trophies would prove dominance, would show whatever lurked here that I wasn't prey. But it gave them windows. Every glass eye is a lens pointing inward. Every plaque is an invitation. They watch through the trophies, learning our routines, our habits, our fears. I can't take them down now. They're part of the house's structure, part of the negotiation. Removing them would be like tearing down a wall while the roof is still on. Everything would collapse. The rules aren't protection, they're tribute. Every time you lock a door, close a curtain, turn your back to the flames, you're acknowledging their power. And the more you acknowledge them, the more real they become, until you can't remember what life was like without them. I've lived here for 40 years following these rules, and I'm tired, so tired. I can't leave. Tried 3 times in the 90s, made it as far as Ohio once. But the rules followed me. I'd hear knocking in hotel rooms, see the shadows between trees wherever I stopped. The only place I could rest was here, where the rules were established, where the negotiation was clear. My advice: leave now. Sell the property, burn it down, let the county take it for back taxes. I don't care. Just don't stay, don't follow the rules, don't negotiate. But if you're still reading this, you've already stayed at least one night. You've already followed at least one rule, and if that's true, then you're starting to understand what I'm talking about. You're starting to feel it, the weight of attention from the trees, the sense that the walls are listening. The understanding that you're not alone here and maybe never will be again. If you can't leave, then follow the rules exactly. Don't innovate. Don't try to outsmart them, and for God's sake, don't try to learn more. Every question you ask, every investigation you pursue gives them more purchase on your mind. This place is a trap, and the bait is our need to understand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Raymond Halpern, October 2019. I read the letter twice, then a third time, my grandfather's words sinking in like cold water through cloth. Outside, the sun had passed its zenith and shadows were lengthening across the clearing. In a few hours, it would be dark again. In a few hours, I'd have to lock the back door and wait to see what came knocking. I heard the sound of an engine and looked out the front window to see Eli's truck coming up the driveway. But there was a second vehicle behind it, an old blue Ford pickup that coughed black smoke from its exhaust. Company. The man who climbed out of the blue Ford moved like someone who'd been hurt and healed wrong. A pronounced limp on his left side, shoulders slightly hunched, but with a hunter's careful awareness of his surroundings. He was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s, wearing a canvas jacket and a faded Tigers baseball cap. His face was weathered leather, etched with lines that spoke of decades spent outdoors. Eli met him at the bottom of the porch steps, and they spoke briefly before both men looked up at me standing in the doorway. "Mara," Eli called. "This is Reed Morrison. He knew your grandfather." Reed approached the porch slowly, his eyes scanning the lodge's exterior with the kind of practiced attention that made me think of my grandfather's journal entries. When his gaze passed over the windows, he paused for a fraction of a second, as if checking something, then continued. "Ms. Halpern," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. He didn't offer his hand. "Your cousin said you've been having some trouble adjusting to the place." "That's one way to put it," I said. He nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Mind if I come in? Best to talk inside before dark." The way he said "before dark" carried weight. I led them into the great room. Reed entered last, and I watched as his eyes moved methodically across the space. The fireplace, the mounted heads, the windows, the mantel where the rule sheet still sat. His expression revealed nothing, but when his gaze lingered on the elk head with its two wide antlers, something flickered across his face that might have been recognition or regret. "Coffee?" I offered. "That'd be good," Reed said, lowering himself into one of the chairs near the fireplace with a wince. "Haven't been in this room in 23 years. Not much has changed." Eli and I exchanged glances. I went to make coffee while Eli sat across from Reed, neither man speaking. When I returned with 3 mugs, Reed was studying the rule sheet. "He added one," Reed said quietly. "There used to be 8, now there's 9. I set the coffee down and pulled my grandfather's letter from my pocket. He left this, along with journals and photos. Said every rule was written in exchange for someone he couldn't bring back. Reed took the letter with hands that trembled slightly. He read it in silence, his jaw working. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back. "Ray was a good man," he said. "Stubborn. Maybe too stubborn. Thought he could understand this place, figure out its rules, find a way to beat it." He shook his head. "No one beats it, you just survive it or you don't. What happened 23 years ago? Eli asked. Reed was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. When he spoke, his voice was distant. There were 4 of us who used to hunt here regularly. Me, Ray, Tom Carver, and Jim Lewiston. We'd come up every November for deer season, sometimes in spring for turkey. Good times, mostly. Ray always had this place stocked, always had stories to tell. He paused. But there were rules, even back then. Don't go out after dark. Don't answer if you hear something call your name. Keep the fire going. We thought they were just traditions, superstitions from the old logging days. He took a sip of coffee, grimacing as if it hurt going down. November of 2001. Tom wanted to hunt the far side of the property near the old logging road. Ray told him not to. Said that section wasn't safe, that things happened there. Tom laughed it off. Said we were getting old and jumpy. Reed's expression darkened. Tom went out alone early morning before sunrise. We figured he'd be back by noon. He never came back, I said quietly. He came back, Reed corrected, and something in his tone made my skin crawl. That's the problem. He came back around 10 a.m., walking up from the tree line carrying his rifle, wearing his orange vest. Looked perfectly normal, but Ray knew. Don't ask me how. Maybe he'd seen it before, maybe he just knew this place too well. But he knew that wasn't Tom anymore. Eli leaned forward. What do you mean, wasn't Tom? It looked like Tom, sounded like Tom, knew things only Tom would know. Stories from our childhood, names of his kids, details about his life. But there were gaps, small things. He didn't blink often enough. His shadow fell wrong in the lamplight. And when he smiled, it was slightly too wide. Reed's hands tightened around his mug. Ray kept us all inside, made up some excuse about the weather turning. Tom stayed with us through the afternoon, acting normal, telling stories, drinking coffee. But as it got closer to sunset, he kept suggesting we go outside, wanted to show us something interesting he'd found in the woods, kept walking toward the doors. What happened? I asked. Ray locked every door the moment the sun touched the horizon. Tom didn't like that. Stopped pretending right around dark, just stopped. Stood in the middle of this room facing the door, not moving, stayed like that for hours. Around 2 a.m. he turned to look at us and his eyes were wrong. Not the color, but the way they moved, like something inside was looking through holes. Reed's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He said, "You're being very impolite. I've walked in Tom's shape all day and you won't even let me out for a walk. Don't you want to see where the real Tom is?" Then he walked to the front door and stood there until dawn. When the sun came up, he just collapsed, like a puppet with cut strings. We checked. It was Tom's body, his ID, his scars, everything. But Tom wasn't inside it anymore. Whatever had been piloting it was gone. The great room was utterly silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. "We buried him in Millstone," Reed continued. "Told the sheriff he'd had a heart attack while hunting. No autopsy. Ray knew the coroner, pulled strings. After that, I never came back here. Jim moved to Arizona. Ray stayed like he always did. Wrote more rules, tried to learn what we were dealing with." "And what are we dealing with?" Eli asked, his voice strained. Reed looked up at the mounted heads, his expression unreadable. "People in town call them different things. The watchers, the wearers, the things in the timber. I don't think they have a real name. Or if they do, it's nothing human mouths can pronounce." He met my eyes. "Your grandfather thought they were old. Older than the lodge. Older than the town, maybe older than the trees. Something that was here before people and learned to mimic us to survive." "Why here?" I asked. "Why this place specifically?" "The lake," Reed said simply. "Blackwater Lake. It's deep. No one's ever found the bottom. Old Ojibwe stories say it's a thin place where the world presses close to something else. The lumber companies avoided this area until the 1920s, even when timber was valuable. When they finally logged it, 3 crews quit in a month, said they heard things that shouldn't exist. He shifted in his chair, wincing again. The lodge was built by men who thought they could claim the land, dominate it with trophies and guns. Didn't work. If anything, it made the problem worse. All those mounted heads, they're not decorations, they're hooks, windows, ways for something outside to look in and learn. My grandfather said removing them would be like tearing down a wall while the roof's still on, I said. Reed nodded. They're part of the structure now, not physically, but spiritually maybe, symbolically. I don't have the right words. The point is they're anchors. They keep whatever's out there connected to in here. And the more you live here, the more you follow the rules, the stronger that connection gets. So what do we do? Eli asked. Reed looked at him with something like pity. You leave. Tonight. Pack what matters and drive away. Don't come back. And Mara? Mara's different. Reed's gaze shifted to me. You've been here longer. You've followed the rules. You've already started negotiating whether you realize it or not. Leaving gets harder the longer you stay. Not impossible, but harder. Like unplugging from something that's already started mapping your brain. How hard? I asked. Your grandfather tried to leave 3 times. Never made it past Ohio. Always came back. Reed's voice was gentle. But he'd been here 40 years. You've been here less than 2 weeks. You can still go. It hasn't claimed you yet. The clock chimed. 4 p.m. 2 hours until sunset. Reed stood slowly, favoring his good leg. I've said my piece. I owed your grandfather that much to warn his kin. But I won't stay past dark, and neither should you. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at the elk head mounted above the fireplace. One more thing, he said. That elk? Your grandfather didn't shoot it. It was already here when he bought the place, mounted on that wall. I asked him once why he kept it when he took down everything else the previous owner left. He said, because it was here before me and it'll be here after. Some things you don't take down. You just learn to live with them. I looked up at the elk. In the afternoon light, its antlers cast long, branching shadows across the ceiling. If you ever hear your own voice calling from the tree line, Reed added, that means they've gotten a good enough look at you to copy. At that point, the rules become a cage instead of a protection. Remember that. He left without another word. We watched from the window as his truck made its slow way down the driveway, brake lights flaring red at each turn until the trees swallowed him completely. Eli turned to me, his face pale in the dimming light. We're leaving, he said. Right now. Pack a bag, we'll come back for the rest later with more people during the day. You should go, I said, but I need to stay. At least for tonight. Mara, there are things in my grandfather's study I haven't gone through yet. Documents, more journals. If I'm going to leave this place, I need to understand it first. I need to know what he knew. It was a lie, and we both knew it. The truth was simpler and more complicated. I wasn't ready to run. Not yet. Not without understanding what had kept my grandfather here for 4 decades, what had transformed him from an optimistic hunter into a man writing rules in exchange for ghosts. Eli stared at me, and I saw him wrestling with the decision. Stay and risk whatever we'd seen last night, or leave and abandon his cousin to the same fate. One more night, he said finally. We both stay. Tomorrow we're gone. We can hire someone to pack up the place, sell it to whoever's stupid enough to buy it, but we're not sleeping here again. Deal? I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him to go, to get out while he still could, but I was terrified of being alone here. Deal, I said. The sun was already touching the tops of the trees, painting the clearing in shades of amber and rust. We had maybe 90 minutes until full dark. We spent them preparing, locking every door, checking every window latch, closing the curtains facing the tree line. Eli brought his toolbox inside and wedged a 2x4 across the back door as an extra brace. I made sandwiches neither of us would eat, and coffee neither of us would drink, just to have something to do with my shaking hands. The rule sheet sat on the mantel like an indictment. When the last light died and true darkness settled over Blackwater Lodge, we were sitting in the great room with our backs to the fireplace, following Rule 5, though the fire hadn't lit itself, waiting. The clock read 8:47 p.m. The first knock came at 9:23. The knock was soft at first, so soft I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. A gentle tap, tap, tap on the kitchen window like a branch brushing glass, except there were no trees close enough to reach that window. Eli and I sat frozen on the couch, facing away from the fireplace, even though the logs were cold and dark. I'd insisted we follow Rule 5 preemptively, not wanting to risk the fire igniting on its own while we weren't prepared. The knocking came again, a little louder, more insistent. Then it moved, around the side of the house, tapping on different windows in sequence, as if something was circling the lodge, testing each possible entry point. "Just like last night," Eli whispered. "It's checking." "Don't respond," I said. Though my throat was so dry the words came out cracked. We didn't hear it. The tapping stopped. For 10 minutes there was only silence and the sound of our breathing. Then at 9:47 p.m. the fireplace erupted into flame. There was no warning, no gradual kindling. One moment the hearth was dark and cold. The next it was roaring with fire, orange and yellow flames leaping up from logs that had been sitting unlit for hours. The temperature in the room spiked immediately, and the crackling was so loud it sounded like gunshots. Eli started to turn toward it. "Don't," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Rule 5. Back to the flames." We repositioned ourselves awkwardly, keeping our backs to the fireplace, staring instead at the dark hallway leading to the kitchen. The light from the fire threw our shadows long and distorted against the wall, and the mounted heads surrounding us seemed to lean in closer, their glass eyes reflecting the flames. The heat was intense, almost unbearable. Sweat began to bead on my forehead and neck. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around to check the fire, to make sure it wasn't spreading to the floorboards or the furniture. But I kept my eyes forward. "Mara," Eli's voice was strange, soft, dreamy. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The fire. It's talking." I listened. At first I heard only the normal sounds of burning wood, pops, hisses, the rushing roar of combustion. But then underneath I caught something else. A rhythm. A pattern to the crackling that almost sounded like words. "Don't listen to it," I said. But Eli was already shifting, his posture relaxing, his head tilting slightly as if to hear better. In the firelight, his shadow on the wall moved wrong, twitching, elongating, its edges fuzzy like smoke. "It sounds like my dad," he said distantly. "He's calling me. Says he needs help with something." Eli's father had died 2 years ago. Heart attack while mowing the lawn. "Eli, no." But he was standing now, turning toward the fireplace with slow, dreamlike movements. His face, when I glimpsed it in profile, was slack, his eyes unfocused and glittering with reflected flames. "He says it's okay," Eli murmured. "Says I should come see. Says Grandpa Ray's out there too, and Tom, and they're all waiting for us. They want to show us what they've been hunting all these years." I shot to my feet and grabbed his shoulders, trying to physically prevent him from looking directly into the fire. He was stronger than I, but his movements were sluggish, uncoordinated, as if he were moving through water. "Eli, listen to me. Your dad isn't out there. It's not real. It's the fire. It's this place. It's trying to trick you." "No," he said and smiled. It was his smile, but wrong, too wide, too knowing. No, you don't understand. They're not trying to trick us. They're inviting us. They want us to join the hunt. Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that sound better than being afraid all the time? I looked into his eyes and saw something looking back that wasn't entirely Eli. The fire popped loudly behind us, and for just a second I smelled something that wasn't wood smoke. Something organic and rotten, like meat that had been left too long in the sun. This was the choice. Let Eli look into the fire and risk losing him to whatever was speaking through it, or physically force him away, possibly hurt him. Definitely break whatever trance he was falling into. I chose action. I hooked my leg behind his knee and pushed, using his own off-balance weight against him. We both went down, sprawling across the old rug in front of the couch. I scrambled on top of him, using my weight to pin him face down, his back to the fire. "I'm sorry," I gasped. I'm sorry." Eli thrashed once violently with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. Then he went completely still. For a horrible moment, I thought I'd hurt him. Then he sucked in a huge, shuddering breath and started to cough. "What?" He twisted to look at me, and his eyes were clear again, confused and frightened. "What happened? Why am I on the floor?" "You looked at the fire," I said, climbing off him. You weren't yourself." Behind us, the flames in the fireplace began to die down rapidly, collapsing from a roar to a whisper in seconds. The heat dissipated as if a window had been opened to winter air. Eli sat up slowly, cradling his head. "I heard my dad's voice," he said quietly. It sounded so real. He was telling me everything was okay, that I should come see something beautiful. His voice cracked. I believed him. I helped him back onto the couch. We sat together in the dimness. The fire had gone out completely now, leaving us with only the lamps, neither of us speaking. Outside, the wind began to rise, rattling the windows. And then we heard it, a voice calling from somewhere beyond the lodge, muffled by walls and glass, but unmistakable. Eli, it's me. I'm stuck out here. I need help." My voice, my exact inflection, the way I pronounced Eli's name, even the slight Michigan accent I'd never quite lost despite years in Detroit. It was me, calling from the forest. Eli's head snapped up. It's not me," I said quickly. "I'm right here. That's not me." "Eli, please," the voice called again, and now it sounded panicked, desperate. "I went out to check something and got turned around. I can't find the lodge. It's dark and I'm scared, and I need you to come get me." Eli stood, his face torn with indecision. "What if—" "It's not me," I repeated, grabbing his arm. "Reed said this would happen. He said if they copy your voice, it means they've gotten a good look at you." The voice continued, growing more frantic. "Eli, I can hear you in there. Why won't you answer? Are you mad at me? I'm sorry I made you stay. I'm sorry, just please help me." Each word was perfectly modulated, the exact rhythm of my speech, the way I apologized too much when I was anxious, the vulnerability I'd shown over the past few days. It knew me. It had studied me, and it was using that knowledge as a weapon. Eli moved toward the front windows and I followed, both of us careful to stay away from the curtains. Through the gap between the fabric and the frame, we could see nothing. Just darkness and the faint reflection of our own lamplight. But the voice was close now, very close. "I'm at the back door," it called, my voice taking on a tone I recognized from late-night phone calls with my mother, forced calm over rising panic. "I'm freezing. Please, Eli. Please, Mara, if you can hear me, I need you to open the door." Then a second voice joined it. Eli's voice, calling from a different direction toward the lake. "Mara, don't listen to her. That's not you. I'm the real Eli. I went outside to check the generator and something's chasing me. Let me in." The two voices overlapped, both begging, both perfectly mimicking our speech patterns and fears. And then a third voice, my grandfather's, low and authoritative from the direction of the tree line. "Mara Ann Halpern, open this door right now. I didn't raise you to be rude to guests." He hadn't raised me at all. I'd barely known him, but the voice was his. I remembered it from those childhood visits, that same firm tone he'd used when explaining how to field dress a deer, when talking about respect for the kill. The voices continued, cycling through different tactics. My mother said she'd driven all night to rescue me. Eli's father told him to stop being afraid. My ex-boyfriend apologized and begged for another chance. Each voice was perfect, and each one knew exactly which emotional strings to pull. They were learning us in real time, adjusting their approach based on our reactions or lack thereof. "How long can they keep this up?" Eli asked, his voice barely audible. "I don't know." The clock read 10:42 p.m., more than 4 hours until dawn. The voices stopped abruptly all at once, leaving a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Then came a new sound, footsteps on the porch. Not one set, multiple sets walking in unison, circling the lodge in a slow, deliberate pattern. Heavy steps that made the old boards creak and groan. Around and around, an almost hypnotic rhythm. And underneath the footsteps, a low humming. Multiple voices blending in a tone that was almost musical, almost a lullaby, but with an underlying wrongness that made my teeth ache. Eli grabbed my hand. His palm was slick with sweat. "What are they doing?" he whispered. I paused, trying to make sense of the pattern. "I think they're trying to wear us down, fatigue, fear. They're waiting for us to make a mistake." As if in response, one of the mounted heads on the wall, the bobcat, made a soft clicking sound. Not wood settling, not the buildings cooling. A deliberate click, like a tongue against teeth. I remembered Rule 7, if the mounted heads turn to watch you, pretend not to notice. Do not count them. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to check, to verify. But I kept my eyes forward on Eli, on the dark hallway, anywhere but the walls. "They're moving," Eli said, his voice hollow. "The heads. I can see them in my peripheral vision. They're all turning to watch us." "Don't look," I said. "Don't count them, don't acknowledge them. There are more than there should be." His grip on my hand tightened painfully. "I counted 12 when we came in. There are at least 15 now. Don't count them." The footsteps on the porch stopped. The humming faded. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. A wet, dragging sound, like something heavy and boneless being pulled across gravel. It was coming from multiple directions, converging on the lodge. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric amplified 1,000 times, something scraped against the foundation. Long, deliberate strokes like claws or antlers dragging across stone. The lights flickered. Once, twice, held. "Rule 3, I said, suddenly remembering. "The curtains, we're not supposed to open them between midnight and 3 a.m. What time is it?" Eli checked his phone. 11:54. 6 minutes. The scratching intensified, moving around the lodge's perimeter. Whatever was out there was big, or there were many of them working in coordination. The sound was everywhere, surrounding us, a cacophony of scraping and dragging and soft, wet impacts against the walls. The clock began to chime midnight. As the last chime faded, the heavy curtain covering the front window, the one facing the tree line, began to move, not swaying from a draft, moving, pulling to the side as if invisible hands were slowly drawing it open. "No," I breathed. "No, we closed all the—" But the curtain continued to slide, revealing inch by inch the darkness beyond the glass. And in that darkness, pressed against the window, were faces. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, overlapping and shifting, some human, some animal, some impossible amalgamations of both. All watching with eyes that reflected our lamplight like 1,000 small fires. They weren't trying to get in. They were showing us what they'd collected, what they'd learned, what they'd taken from decades of hunters and visitors and foolish relatives who'd ignored the rules. I saw my grandfather's face in the mass, younger, from 30 years ago. I saw Tom Carver, his expression frozen in the moment before he understood what was happening. I saw people I didn't recognize, wearing clothes from different eras, their mouths open in eternal silent screams. And I saw my own face reflected not in the glass but among the others, a copy, a draft, a version of me they were building from observation. Eli made a sound like a wounded animal. The curtain stopped moving, leaving a 3-foot gap. The faces pressed closer, and the window began to bow inward, the old glass creaking under impossible pressure. This was it. The point of no return. Either we broke, ran, screamed, tried to escape into the night where they were waiting, or we endured. I pulled Eli down to the floor, away from the windows, into the space between the couch and the fireplace. We curled together in the darkness, my hands over his ears, his arms around my shoulders, both of us shaking so hard our teeth rattled. I began to speak, not sure what I was saying. Maybe prayers I'd learned as a child, maybe just sounds to drown out the scraping and clicking and the weight of all those eyes. You're not on my side of the wall. I found myself repeating words that felt older than language. You're not on my crew. You're not my family. You're not real. You're not invited. You're not... The window shattered. Glass exploded inward, and the temperature in the room plummeted instantly, from comfortable warmth to below freezing in seconds. My breath misted white, and frost began forming on the interior walls with unnatural speed, creeping across the plaster like fast-motion footage of ice spreading. But nothing came through the broken window. The faces were gone. The pressure was gone. There was only the jagged hole where the glass had been, cold wind pouring through and the distant sound of the trees thrashing in the sudden gale. Eli and I remained frozen on the floor, waiting for something, anything, to reach through that opening. Nothing did. "Why?" Eli started, then stopped, as if afraid speaking would invite disaster. I forced myself to crawl forward to look at the broken window from a safe distance. Glass littered the floor, glittering in the lamplight. The curtain billowed in the wind. Beyond, there was only darkness and the vague shapes of trees. Then I understood. "They don't need to come in," I said. "The window's broken. The barrier's compromised. They could come in whenever they want now. So why don't they?" I thought about my grandfather's journal, his observations about negotiation and rules. Because that's not what this is about. They're not trying to kill us, they're trying to train us. Every time we follow a rule out of fear, we strengthen the connection. And breaking the window, that's our fault for not maintaining the lodge properly, for not checking the integrity of the glass. Now we have to deal with the consequence. Eli stared at me. "That's insane. That's the point." We spent the next hour trying to cover the broken window. Eli retrieved a sheet of plywood from the basement while I swept up the glass, both of us moving in numb, mechanical silence. The cold was brutal. Our fingers went stiff and clumsy as we worked to hammer the plywood over the empty frame. The sounds outside had stopped. No more scraping, no more footsteps, no more voices. Just wind and the creak of trees, and occasionally a soft whistle from somewhere in the depths of the forest. Not threatening, almost playful, like a hunter calling a dog. By 2 a.m., we'd secured the plywood and rehung the curtain over it. The great room was still freezing, but at least the wind had stopped pouring in. We retreated to the kitchen as far from the windows as we could get and huddled near the propane stove with the burners lit for warmth. Neither of us could sleep. We took turns checking the doors, testing the locks, peering through peepholes into darkness that pressed back. At 2:47 a.m., Eli's phone rang. We both jumped, staring at the device lying on the kitchen table. The screen showed a number, but not one from his contacts. Just a local area code and 7 digits. "Don't answer it," I said. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. A minute later, a notification appeared. New voicemail. Eli looked at me. I shook my head, but he was already reaching for the phone. "We need to know," he said, and put it on speaker. The voicemail played, and my grandfather's voice came through the tinny speaker. "Raymond Halpern is calling for Mara. Found some information you might want about the property. Give me a call when you can. Numbers on the deed paperwork." The message ended. The phone screen showed the call had come in at 2:47 a.m. The date was correct, but my grandfather had been dead for 4 months. Eli deleted the voicemail with shaking hands and turned off his phone completely. "They have your number now," I said quietly. "They'll keep trying." "How is that possible? How can they—" "I don't think it's technology," I interrupted. "I think it's the lodge. It's soaked in decades of voices, conversations, panphone calls. Everything that's ever been said here is stored in the walls, in the wood, and they can access it, replay it, use it." Eli's face was pale in the dim light. "We can't stay until morning. We'll lose our minds. We don't have a choice. Going outside now would be worse." At 3:04 a.m., the scratching resumed, but different this time. Softer, more methodical. It was coming from inside the walls. We listened as something moved through the spaces between the studs, circling the kitchen, passing behind the cabinets, and under the floor. The sound was wrong. Too fluid, too continuous, like water flowing through pipes, except made of something solid. The refrigerator hummed to life with a click, and in the sudden additional noise, I almost missed the sound of the basement door's lock turning. Almost. "Eli," I whispered. "The basement." The door was at the end of the hallway, just visible from where we sat. As we watched, the doorknob turned slowly, smoothly, and the door swung open 6 inches. Nothing emerged. The darkness beyond was absolute. Our lights didn't penetrate it at all, as if the basement had become a solid wall of black. Then a voice drifted up from below. My voice, but younger, maybe 16 years old. "Grandpa, are you down there? Mom sent me to get you for dinner." A memory. I'd said those exact words on my second visit to the lodge when I was a teenager, and my grandfather had disappeared into the basement during a family gathering. The voice repeated the phrase like a recording stuck in a loop, getting slightly slower and more distorted each time until it didn't sound like speech anymore. Just a series of sounds shaped like words. The door swung wider. "Close it," Eli said. "We have to close it." But neither of us moved. The basement had never been in the rules. No prohibition against going down there. No warning about keeping the door closed. Which meant either it hadn't been a problem when my grandfather wrote the rules, or he deliberately omitted it, or it was one of the crossed-out rules we couldn't read. The distorted voice loop stopped. From the darkness below came a new sound, ascending footsteps, slow and heavy, accompanied by a wet, dragging sound. Something was coming up the stairs. I don't remember making the decision. One moment we were frozen in the kitchen, the next we were both running for the front door. Abandoning all the rules, driven by pure survival instinct to get out, to get away, to escape into the night where at least we could run. Eli reached the door first and grabbed the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. He wrenched at it, swearing, his hands slipping on the cold metal. The bolt was locked, but it wouldn't unlock. The mechanism jammed or froze or simply refusing to cooperate. Behind us, whatever was climbing from the basement reached the top of the stairs. I looked back and saw a shape in the hallway. Tall, wrong, its outline shifting and uncertain like heat shimmer. It stood in the space between the basement door and the great room, and even though I couldn't see details in the darkness, I could feel it looking at us. studying us. "Kitchen?" I gasped, and we ran back the way we'd come, slamming the kitchen door and throwing the bolt. It was a flimsy interior door, hollow core, meant for privacy, not security, but it was something between us and whatever that had been. We shoved the kitchen table against the door and piled chairs on top of it, building a barricade that we both knew was psychological more than practical. Then we retreated to the far corner of the kitchen, pressed against the cold exterior wall, and waited. The footsteps moved through the great room. We heard them pause at each window, each door, each mounted head on the wall. Checking, investigating, learning the space. At 3:33 a.m., they stopped outside the kitchen door. The doorknob rattled once, testing. Then silence, a soft knock, 3 times, patient, deliberate, the same rhythm as my first night. "Mara," my grandfather's voice said from the other side of the door, clear. "Open up. We need to talk about what you're doing wrong. You're making this harder than it has to be." I clamped my hands over my mouth to keep from responding. "I lived here 40 years, the voice continued. "I know how to survive this place, but you're fighting it. You're afraid, and fear makes you sloppy, makes you break things." A pause. "Like windows." The doorknob rattled again, harder. "Let me in, and I'll teach you. I'll show you how to negotiate properly, how to give them what they want so they leave you alone." "It's not that hard, Mara. You're smart. You take after your grandmother that way." Eli's hand found mine in the darkness, gripping tight enough to hurt. "Or don't," the voice said, and now there was something else underneath it, a harmonic, like 2 voices speaking in unison. "Stay in there until dawn, but understand. Every second you spend here, every rule you follow, every compromise you make, you're choosing this. You're building the cage around yourself, 1 bar at a time. And someday when you try to leave, you'll find the cage is complete, and the only way out is through. And what's waiting through is worse than staying." The footsteps retreated. The kitchen door shuddered once, hard, as if something had struck it, then fell still. We sat in the corner, clutching each other, listening to the sounds of the lodge settling around us, creaks and groans and the whisper of wind through the broken window, and waited for dawn. The clock above the kitchen sink ticked onward. 3:47, 4:02, 4:28. At 5:15, the first gray light appeared in the window above the sink. Not sunrise yet, but that pre-dawn glow that promises morning is coming. The sounds inside the walls stopped. The cold began to recede. The sense of pressure, of being watched by 1,000 eyes, gradually lifted. By 5:43, when real sunlight touched the tops of the trees and spilled into the clearing, the lodge felt normal again. Old and creaky and full of dust, but just a building. We dismantled our barricade and opened the kitchen door carefully, ready to run. The hallway was empty. The basement door stood open, showing concrete stairs leading down into a perfectly ordinary storage space. The great room was undisturbed except for the broken window, which looked exactly like what it was. Storm damage, an accident, nothing supernatural. Even the mounted heads were positioned normally, facing forward, glass eyes dull in the morning light. Eli and I walked through the lodge in silence, checking each room, finding everything exactly as it should be. In the study, I noticed something new. A thin film of frost on the inside of the window, even though the room should have been heated. When I looked closely, I could see patterns in the frost, shapes that might have been faces or trees or antlers. They melted as I watched, leaving only condensation. We packed quickly. Clothes, documents, laptops, my grandfather's journals, anything important got thrown into garbage bags and hauled to Eli's truck. We worked in frantic silence, both of us jumping at every creak, every shadow. By 8 a.m., we were done. The truck was loaded. We stood on the porch, looking back at Blackwater Lodge in the flat morning light. "I'm never coming back here," Eli said. I wanted to agree. I wanted to get in the truck and drive away and never think about this place again, but I couldn't make myself say the words. Instead, I went back inside one last time, Eli protesting from the driveway, and added a line to the rule sheet in my own handwriting. Rule 9. If the lodge ever feels like home, leave. It means it's finished hunting you and started keeping you. I left the sheet on the mantel, weighted down with a stone from the fireplace, and walked out. We drove away as the sun cleared the trees, the lodge shrinking in the side mirror until the forest swallowed it completely. I told myself I'd never go back. For 3 weeks, I stayed with Eli at his apartment in Grand Rapids, sleeping on his couch, spending my days applying for jobs and trying to pretend the lodge had been a bad dream. Eli didn't talk about what we'd experienced. He'd thrown himself into work, taking extra contracts, staying busy from dawn to late evening. When he was home, he drank more than usual and kept all the lights on. Neither of us discussed what we'd heard and seen. It was as if we'd made an unspoken pact. If we didn't acknowledge it, it couldn't follow us, but I knew better. Small things kept happening, wrong things. My phone would ring in the middle of the night, showing local Michigan numbers I didn't recognize. When I answered, and I always answered, unable to stop myself, there would be silence on the other end. Not dead air, but listening silence, the kind where you can tell someone's there, breathing softly, waiting. Once I heard my grandfather's voice whisper, "You forgot something," before the line went dead. I'd dream about the lodge every night, not nightmares exactly, but memories that felt too vivid, too detailed. I'd walk through the great room and notice new mounted heads on the walls. Animals I didn't recognize, with eyes that followed my dream self as I moved. I'd hear footsteps in the rooms above me and know with dream logic certainty that they were my own footsteps from the future walking through the lodge I hadn't yet returned to. I'd wake up sweating, disoriented, sometimes convinced I could smell the lodge. Pine wood and old leather and something organic underneath like soil and decay. The worst was the pull, that's the only way I can describe it. A constant low-level compulsion to go back. Not strong enough to make me act, but always there like an itch I couldn't scratch or a word on the tip of my tongue. I'd catch myself looking up directions to Blackwater Lodge. I'd start to compose emails to property managers about listing it for sale, then delete them. I'd lie awake at night thinking about the journals I'd left behind, the documents I hadn't finished reading, the questions I hadn't answered. You're building the cage around yourself one bar at a time. Eli noticed. He didn't say anything, but I'd catch him watching me with an expression that was part concern, part fear, as if he thought I might disappear one night, and he'd find me back at the lodge following rules I couldn't break. In the 4th week, I drove to Millstone. I didn't plan it. I woke up early on a Saturday, told Eli I was going for a drive to clear my head, and ended up on County Road 47 before I'd consciously made the decision. The trees formed their familiar tunnel, branches overhead filtering the autumn sunlight into shifting patterns. I didn't go all the way to the lodge. I stopped about a mile out, at a wide spot in the road where hunters sometimes park during deer season, and sat in my car with the engine running. From here I couldn't see the building, but I could feel it. That same pull, stronger now, insistent, welcoming. I called Reed Morrison. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice gruff and suspicious, until I identified myself. "You back at the lodge?" he asked immediately. "No, I left 3 weeks ago." A long pause. "But you're thinking about going back?" It wasn't a question. "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted. About the things I didn't understand, the rules my grandfather crossed out, what happened to the people in those photos, how it works, what it wants. "Stop," Reed said firmly. "Stop asking questions. Every question you ask is like sending out a fishing line, and that place is really good at grabbing the hook." but if I understood it, your grandfather understood it, didn't help him. He still spent 40 years trapped there, following rules that kept changing, negotiating with something that doesn't negotiate in good faith. You want that life? I looked through the windshield at the wall of trees, the road disappearing into shadow. I just want to know why, I said quietly. Why that place? Why my family? Why are we connected to it? Reed sighed. Your great-great-grandfather, Samuel Halpern, was part of the logging crew that first cleared this area in the 20s. They found something in the woods around the lake, some kind of old site, stone formations that didn't look natural. Samuel thought they were valuable and wanted to study them. The company wanted to blast them out and keep logging. He paused, and I heard the clink of glass, a swallow. Samuel made a deal with the company foreman. He'd buy the land around the lake, preserve the stones, and the company could log everywhere else. They agreed. He built the lodge as a hunting club, tried to make money off it, but people kept leaving, saying they felt watched, saying the forest wasn't right. By the time Samuel died in 1947, the place had been abandoned for years. It passed to his son, who never set foot there, then to your grandfather, who thought he could reclaim it, and now to you. So it's a curse? I asked. Some kind of family curse? It's a connection, Reed said. Samuel disturbed something that shouldn't have been disturbed, and it's been watching his bloodline ever since. Waiting. Learning. Your grandfather thought that if he could understand the rules, he could break the connection. But I think the opposite's true. The more you learn, the more it learns about you. Then what do I do? Sell the property, or let it go to the state for back taxes, or burn it down? Though I'm not sure that would work. Just don't go back, Mara. Don't let it finish whatever it started when you stayed that first night. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, staring at the road, feeling the pull like a tide. Finally, I started the engine and turned around. But I knew, in the hollow place behind my ribs where fear lives, that this wasn't over. Over the following weeks, I tried to move on. I got a job doing remote social media management for a Detroit-based marketing firm. I started looking for apartments I could afford. I went through the motions of rebuilding my life, but the pull never faded. If anything, it grew stronger. I'd see the lodge in reflections, not my own reflection, but through reflections, like looking through a window. A shop window in Grand Rapids would show me standing on the lodge's porch instead of the city street. The bathroom mirror in Eli's apartment would, for just a second, reveal the great room behind me. The mounted heads turned to watch. Once, while working at a coffee shop, I glanced at my laptop screen and saw, reflected in the dark glass, my grandfather sitting at the long wooden table in the lodge, writing in his journal. He looked up and met my eyes, and his lips moved. Come home. I slammed the laptop shut, and when I opened it again, there was only my normal desktop. Eli started avoiding me. Not obviously. He was still kind, still let me stay, but I could feel him pulling back, spending more nights at his girlfriend's place, taking weekend trips to visit friends. He was afraid of me, or afraid of what was attached to me. I couldn't blame him. In early December, I got a call from the Millstone County Clerk's office. The property taxes on Blackwater Lodge were 6 months overdue. As the legal inheritor, I needed to either pay them or start the process of transferring the property out of my name. We can give you until January, the clerk said, but after that, we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings. I should have been relieved. This was the escape Reed had talked about. Let the county take it, let someone else deal with the burden. Instead, I felt panic. A certainty that if I lost legal ownership of the lodge, I'd lose something essential. Some part of myself was already there, and severing the connection would mean cutting away that piece, leaving me incomplete. I paid the taxes with money I didn't have using a credit card I'd just gotten approved for. That night I dreamed I was walking through the lodge and it was different. The mounted heads were gone, replaced by framed photographs of myself at different ages, childhood, college, recent. In each photo I was standing in the lodge, wearing different clothes, living different days. In the dream I understood these weren't photos of possible futures. They were documentation of days that had already happened in some version of reality. Times I'd been at this lodge without remembering. The lodge was showing me that I'd never really left. I woke up crying. By Christmas I'd made my decision. I told Eli I was moving out, getting my own place. I didn't tell him where. He hugged me goodbye and I felt him shaking. "Don't go back there," he whispered. "Please, Mara, don't go back." "I won't," I lied. I packed my car in the gray light of December 28th. Everything I owned fit in the Honda, a sad testament to how much I'd lost in the past year. As I pulled out of Eli's parking lot, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him standing at his apartment window watching. He knew where I was going. I drove north through snow that started as flurries and built to a steady fall by the time I reached County Road 47. The gravel road was covered in fresh powder, no tracks marring the white surface. The trees were dark verticals against the gray sky, and the tunnel they formed was so familiar it hurt. When the lodge came into view, I felt something in my chest loosen, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months. It looked the same. Snow on the roof, windows dark, the clearing pristine and untouched. Waiting. I parked and sat in the car for a long moment, engine running, heat blasting, trying to convince myself to turn around. But the pull was overwhelming now. Not a compulsion, but a recognition. This place was mine. I was its. We'd been connected since before I was born, and fighting that connection had been like fighting gravity. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the cold. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, no distant highway noise. Just the soft hush of falling snow and the creak of trees under their white burden. I walked to the front door and found it unlocked. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. The furniture, the mounted heads, the rule sheet on the mantel. But there was no dust. The air smelled fresh, as if the lodge had been maintained in my absence. I picked up the rule sheet and read through all 9 rules, including the one I'd added. Then I set it back on the mantel and went to start a fire. It's been 8 months since I moved back to Blackwater Lodge. I tell people I'm renovating it, that I'm going to turn it into a retreat center or an Airbnb, capitalize on the remote location and rustic charm. I've even started a website with placeholder photos and vague descriptions of authentic wilderness experience. But I haven't had a single visitor. I'm careful about that. The rules have changed, or maybe expanded is a better word. I found 3 more written in my grandfather's handwriting on loose sheets tucked into various hiding places, behind books, under the floorboards, folded inside picture frames. Rule 10. Never bring another person here for more than 1 night. They'll start to see what you see, and the place doesn't like sharing. Rule 11. On the 1st of each month, leave an offering at the edge of the clearing, food, tools, something of value. It maintains the negotiation. Rule 12. If you find new rules that you didn't write, follow them. They're coming from someone who learned the hard way. I follow them all meticulously. The rules give my days structure and purpose. Wake at dawn. Check the doors and windows, maintain the offerings, keep detailed records of every sound, every anomaly, every moment when the lodge breathes in ways buildings shouldn't. I've stopped seeing the mounted heads as decorations. They're cameras, yes, but they're also memorials. Each one represents something that was taken, studied, understood, and returned as a hollow shell. The elk above the fireplace, the one that was here before my grandfather. I think it might be the oldest. I think it might remember when the lodge was first built, when Samuel Halpern disturbed the stones and made his unknowing bargain. Sometimes late at night I sit facing it and whisper questions. I never get answers, but the quality of the silence changes, becomes thoughtful rather than empty. The whistling from the forest is constant now, especially during the dark hours between midnight and 3 a.m. I've learned to distinguish different types. The high musical whistle means they're curious. The low droning whistle means they're feeding. On what? I try not to imagine. The whistle that sounds almost like laughter means they've found something entertaining. Usually an animal that's wandered too close to the lake. I don't go near the lake anymore. That's not a written rule, but I understand it instinctively. The lake is theirs in a way the forest isn't. The lake is the source, the thin place Reed mentioned, and looking into its black water for too long makes me see things moving in the depths that couldn't possibly fit in a body of water this size. I talk to Reed once a month. He calls to check if I'm still alive, and I reassure him that I am, that I'm managing, that the rules are working. He sounds sadder each time, as if he's watching me disappear by degrees into the same trap that caught my grandfather. Maybe he is. Eli hasn't called in 4 months. I don't blame him. The dreams are different now. I still walk through the lodge at night, but in the dreams I'm not alone. There are others here, people I don't recognize from my time, but who feel familiar nonetheless. Previous owners, previous keepers of the rules. We pass each other in the hallways and nod, acknowledging our shared burden without speaking. Sometimes my grandfather is there. He looks younger, healthier, the way he must have looked when he first bought this place. We sit together in the great room, backs to the fireplace, and he tells me things I forget when I wake, but which feel important in the moment. Once he said, "The trick is accepting that you're not negotiating for freedom. You're negotiating for acceptable terms of captivity." I think that was actually him, not something using his voice. The sentiment feels too honest, too resigned. Spring came late this year, the snow lingering until mid-April. When it finally melted, I found things in the clearing that hadn't been there before. Circles of stones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. A deer skeleton posed upright on its hind legs, antlers arranged around the clearing's perimeter like fence posts. I left them alone. That felt like the right choice. By summer, I'd stopped thinking about leaving. The pull wasn't necessary anymore. I wanted to be here. The lodge felt like the only real place in the world, the only location with weight and meaning. When I thought about Detroit or Grand Rapids or any other city, they seemed like dreams. Insubstantial and temporary. This was real. The rules were real. The things in the forest were real. Everything else was just pretending. I started writing my own observations in a new ledger, continuing my grandfather's work. Dates, times, weather conditions, and the nature of each incident. I'm building a comprehensive record, though I'm not sure who it's for. Maybe the next person. Maybe just for the lodge itself, which seems to appreciate documentation. In July, I got an email from the county clerk. My grandfather's will was being processed through final probate, and there was a second cousin I'd never heard of, Kayla Mercer, 23, from Ohio, who had inquired about visiting the property. She wanted to see where Grandpa Ray spent his last years. She was thinking about taking a gap year, maybe living somewhere remote to find herself and work on her nature photography. I should have said no. I should have told her the lodge was condemned, dangerous, off limits. Instead, I wrote back and said she was welcome to visit, that I'd moved on and left the place empty, but she was family, and family had a right to see their inheritance. I sent her detailed directions. I told her where to find the key, under the third stone on the left side of the porch. I said the place had quirks but was basically sound, and that if she wanted to stay a few days, there was propane and running water. I didn't mention the rules. I told myself I was giving her a choice, that she was an adult, and if she chose to stay, that was her decision. But I knew better. I knew exactly what I was doing. The same thing my grandfather had done, probably. The same thing every keeper of Blackwater Lodge had done when the burden became too heavy and the need to share it, or pass it on, became overwhelming. Rule 10 says never bring another person here for more than one night. But it doesn't say anything about inviting them when you're not there. I packed a bag in early September and drove to Traverse City, where I've rented a small studio apartment overlooking the bay. I've been here 3 weeks now, and I'm starting to feel more human. The pull is still there, a constant background awareness of the lodge, like a second heartbeat. But it's bearable now. Kayla messaged me 2 days ago. She'd arrived at the lodge, found it rustic but charming, and planned to stay through October to catch the fall colors. She was already posting photos on Instagram, the clearing at sunset, the lake through the trees, artistic shots of the great room's interior with sunlight streaming through the windows. In one photo, I could see the rule sheet on the mantle, slightly out of focus in the background. She hasn't asked me about it yet. This morning, she posted a new photo, a selfie taken in the great room at dusk. She was smiling, face flushed with excitement, eyes bright. The caption read, "Day 4 at the family lodge." "Found some weird house rules," Grandpa wrote. "Hilarious old school stuff. We'll definitely be testing these out for content." Stay tuned. In the background of the selfie, visible over her shoulder, the mounted deer heads were all turned slightly toward the camera. I study the image on my phone, zooming in, checking details I don't want to see but can't look away from. In the darkened window behind Kayla, the one facing the tree line, there's a reflection. Not of the great room, but of the forest. And in the forest, barely visible among the trees, are shapes, tall, narrow, waiting. I should call her. I should tell her to leave immediately, to break the rules, to run. But I don't. Instead, I close the Instagram app and set my phone down. I stand at my apartment window looking out over Traverse City's lights reflecting on the dark water of Grand Traverse Bay, and I think about Blackwater Lodge 60 miles north. I think about Kayla, alone there as the sun sets, reading through rules she doesn't understand, laughing at warnings written in blood. I think about what she'll hear tonight when the knocking starts. And I think about how, maybe next spring, when the pool becomes unbearable again, I'll drive back to find the lodge maintained and clean. The rules sheet updated with a 10th line in handwriting that isn't mine, and another keeper following the rhythms that the lodge demands. The cycle continues. It always continues. My grandfather spent 40 years learning that lesson. I learned it in 8 months. How long will it take, Kayla? My phone buzzes. A new message from her. "Hey, Mara. Quick question. What does Rule 3 mean about the curtains? Just want to make sure I understand before it gets too late. Also, did you have problems with the back door lock? It's kind of loose." I stare at the message for a long time. Then I type, "Back door needs to be locked before sunset. It's important. The curtain thing is just an old superstition, but the door lock is serious. Make sure it's secure." I hit send before I could reconsider. One rule. I've given her one rule to follow, and if she follows it, she'll want to understand why. And understanding will lead to belief, and belief will lead to negotiation, and negotiation will lead to exactly where I am now. Far enough away to breathe, but never far enough to be free. The phone buzzes again. "Okay, thanks. Will do. This place is so peaceful. I can see why you loved it here." I turn off my phone and pour myself a drink. Outside, the city glows and hums with life. Cars pass on the street below. Somewhere, people are laughing, arguing, living normal lives in normal places that don't demand tribute or enforce rules written in exchange for the dead. But all of that feels distant, muted, like I'm watching it through thick glass. The only thing that feels real, truly, solidly real, is Blackwater Lodge, 60 miles north, waiting in the forest with its doors locked and its curtains drawn and its mounted heads turned to watch whoever's foolish enough to stay after dark. And now there's someone new for them to watch. Someone new to teach the rules. Someone new to keep. I should feel guilty, but mostly I feel relieved. 3 weeks later, Kayla Mercer posts a new photo to Instagram. The rule sheet on the mantle now with 10 lines instead of 9. The caption reads, "Found out why Grandpa wrote these. Will explain everything in my next post." That next post never comes. Her last Instagram activity is a story posted at 11:47 p.m., showing the view from the front window, darkness, trees, and nothing else. The caption is a single word: listening. The account goes silent after that. But if you look at Mara Halpern's location data from her phone, subpoenaed months later during a welfare check after Kayla's family reports her missing, you'll see that despite claiming to be in Traverse City, her phone pings off a single cell tower consistently, the one servicing County Road 47 in northern Michigan, approximately 1 mile from where Blackwater Lodge sits in the forest. She's been there all along, following the rules, waiting for the next one.